I'm Tim Constantine, and from Chesterfield, Missouri, this is the Capitol Hill Show. President Trump has made cutting the size and scope of government the centerpiece of his second term in the White House. No department, no service is safe from this. If he and his team see what they consider to be government bloat or waste, the chances are that department is going to see some significant cuts. Some have expressed concern that all this cutting could end up cutting safety in some parts of the government, in particular in the environment. Who better to answer questions about those concerns than the Environmental Protection Administrator himself, Lee Zeldin? We caught up with Administrator Zeldin in Missouri, where he was sitting down with farmers and with victims of a Superfund cleanup site. Though he's only been in the position for a short time, Zeldin has made a point to leave the bubble of Washington and go out and meet real people impacted by environmental policy.
Administrator Zeldin came here to talk to us about the different regulations that his administration is going to roll back and bring some common sense into the EPA, and wanted to speak with farmers and ranchers about different things from biofuels to chemicals and crop protection and those type of things. So we're here, Missouri Cattlemen's Association, to just hear about that.
Jeff Reed is president of the Missouri Cattlemen's Association. Farmers have been frustrated that the EPA seems to change the rules on them every couple of years.
Waters of the United States has been going on for years. We've had the Sackett decision out now. It's very clear on how and when that should be implemented and what waters the United States and what is not. And so one thing Administrator Zeldin spoke about was durable, and he wants, whenever at the end of the day, he wants the administration to come up with something that's durable and will last through administrations, not just keep being this cyclical thing that every 4 years we change what a definition is.
There are billions of dollars that we've now been able to free up. My goal is that if a dollar is spent, that the dollar is spent on directly remediating the environmental issue. I do not want to see a dollar spent to some group to tell us that we have an issue that needs to get dealt with. Through that effort,
even more telling was Zeldin's willingness to meet with members of a community devastated by radiation contamination.
We chose this community. I didn't grow up in this community. My husband and I, in year 2000, so almost 25 years ago, drove around this community and we just fell in love with it. We fell in love with the schools. There were churches. It was everything we ever wanted. And so we deliberately moved here and we sank roots, and we didn't know what Superfund was. We had assumed, I think like a lot of people, that had we been moving next to a dangerous site, we would have been notified, or when we went to purchase a home, it would have been disclosed. So we did everything. We even had our home checked for radon and, looked around as you do when you're buying your house. Is there any leaks? Do we see any smell any mold? We were careful. And so we sank our roots here, and I have 3 children. They're all in their teens now. But they were little when I found out about this situation in 2013. And we'd already been living here for 13 years.
We had to give ourselves a name.
Don Chapman co-founded Just Moms of St. Louis to try to fight for her community after it was rocked by disclosures of government errors and cover-ups.
And I've always been a very careful person. And I've always been a very alert person, and I remember sitting there when I found out. I had made a phone call to the state regulatory agency, the Department of Natural Resources, and I remember talking to this guy, and I was actually sitting there because my kids were going down for a nap, so I was patting my oldest, the one who's now sick, and I remember looking ahead, and I had hand-painted a giraffe on the wall. I was meticulous. I picked out everything, and I looked at that giraffe, and I was so mad at myself. I thought, I picked out every color. I didn't want the giraffe to be scary. I took my time with everything. How did I miss this? And I didn't. It was hidden.
Chapman's fight is very personal. Her son, who grew up around the toxic problems, has a variety of health issues.
He attended the high school that you can see behind us, and was on bed rest for 2 years. He just really has struggled, and it's interesting because when he, again, as careful as I was, I didn't even catch that he was getting sick. It just happened. And when he was diagnosed, I mean, it was devastating, but I was just so thankful it wasn't cancer.
She makes that statement because the cancer rates among area youth are through the roof.
Right now where you're sitting, there's almost a 300% increase in childhood brain cancers that has been documented by the state of Missouri and health agencies.
When Dawn and other families first engaged the EPA more than 10 years ago, they were not encouraged.
When I first engaged with EPA right after I found out, they were so adversarial. I think they wanted us to just sit quietly and not look at the site too closely. And I think right away, and not just myself, but other, like the fire department, I remember we were all looking at each other and going, why don't they want us to read these documents? This seems very strange. It was the opposite of welcoming, and don't worry about it. I can hear your kids in the background, why don't you go? I'm almost patronizing. That went on until, President Trump's administration came in and we had a new head of EPA, and he sat down with us in the community and he was like, I can hardly believe this is happening. This is just, how did this happen? And from there, we were listened to. When President Trump 1.0 brought his EPA in here, we were listened to, and we were able to get a really good decision to clean up the site finally under them. But also, they told us they were sorry that this had happened to us. There was empathy, there was compassion, and they looked around and they could see that we were sick, and that was acknowledged. And there were some mistakes that EPA made historically at this site that were documented that they said, yeah, this happened and we're so sorry, and yes, it has led to tragic circumstances.
I didn't find that out.
Karen Nickel co-founded Just Mom St. Louis with Dawn. She grew up in the area and was unknowingly exposed to radiation throughout her childhood and adult life.
My parents didn't know. The parents of my friends didn't know. I actually went back when I did find out in 2012, and I went back through Facebook and located every friend I could find. And lo and behold, I did find that a lot of them had passed away from rare cancers, and their parents. You would swim in it, catch crawdads, it'd freeze over, you would ice skate, there was rope swings. That was where you lived. I have several autoimmune illnesses. I have lupus, psoriatic arthritis, and I had a discussion with my doctor, and he said that, lupus especially is environmentally triggered a lot of times. And there was just so happened a news story about Coldwater Creek and contamination, and I was like, okay. Well, in research, I found out there were 4 other women on my street that had lupus.
It's against that backdrop that the EPA administrator came to St. Louis. I sat down with him to dig into his goals for the agency, the changes he has in mind, and the people he's meeting and talking to all across America. A lot of the issues are where the EPA is going now, but to really understand, let's go back to the beginning. When the EPA was established in 1970, what was the mandate? What was the purpose?
I think that there's many important purposes of helping Americans have access to clean air, land, and water. You had these landmark laws working its way through the legislative process, and you ended up with laws like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Toxic Substances Chemicals Act, CERCLA with regard to Superfund sites. So the need and purpose of EPA, which was born out of this desire amongst conservatives and liberals, Republicans, Democrats, all wanting to be pro-environment and conserve the greatness of the beauty of America, It only ended up becoming more amplified as these big laws were getting passed through DC.
It seems like it's not a red issue, it's not a blue issue. Everybody wants clean air, everybody wants a nice environment. But with anything, with everything, whether it's anything in government, it all starts with good intentions. Everybody has great intentions. That might be we want a stronger defense, great intention. That might be we want better education, great intention. Might be we want clean air, clean water, great intention. But does government always get it right despite the good intentions?
Government often gets it wrong, and it's important that government is aware of its responsibilities to be accountable and transparent, that they're abiding by obligations under the law, respectful of the rule of law, loyal to the principle of cooperative federalism, having an intense desire of being able to work with states whenever possible, being efficient with taxpayer dollars. And too often along the way, you will get people in leadership positions, will change the culture, might start bending the approach. They might seek to become activists in a way that aren't authorized by Congress, and they have to get reeled back in. And at that moment, hopefully the American people will speak with their voice, and I think that's what happened November 5th.
You use the word transparency, and I think it's so important that accurate information is conveyed to the public. There was a former Obama EPA official on CBS television news this past week, and I'm going to read to you a quote from him. He said, "You, Lee Zeldin, are taking us back to the 1960s, before the times when we had regulations that actually cleaned our water." And then he went on and said, "The Trump administration will take us back to a time when we didn't have regulation." Is the goal of the Trump administration to have no regulation on air or water or the environment?
No, and under the federal laws that are in place, that isn't a reality that would even be possible if somebody entered a position like mine and that was their goal. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, when you have laws like the Clean Air Act and Safe Drinking Water Act and CERCLA, you have visits like today, where we're here in the St. Louis area of Missouri, and you have concerned members of the community, led by their voice and Senator Hawley, looking for the government to do more, not less. And I found through my first month and a half in EPA, all the confirmation in the world you need that the Superfund mission is critically important. It needs to be appropriately staffed, needs to be appropriately funded. Now, at the same time, regulations get enacted that strangulate the economy, that make it impossible to be able to afford to survive. People who can least afford these regulations are the ones who get punished the most. Some people in government trying to use regulations as a heavy hand to destroy industries and to do it in a way that we're not even prepared for what would come next. And we've seen it too much in the energy space. And that's why when the president was campaigning in 2024 about his desire to unleash energy dominance, to improve the economy, to make our country prosperous again, to make it easier for Americans to achieve the American dream. When President Trump talks about the golden age of American success for all Americans, it's one that is not just a demand to get placed on an agency like the Department of Treasury or Department of Commerce because they might be dealing with money more. Even if you're in an agency like, say, the Environmental Protection Agency, you have to act very cognizant of those demands by the American people who want clean air, land, and water. And they understand that there are some important regulations and laws that are in place to ensure it. But they don't want those powers to get abused. And that's why the Supreme Court weighed in cases like Loper Bright, overturning the Chevron doctrine, saying to an agency like the EPA and all others that if there is vague language in a law, I, as head of an agency, can't just make up my own law. It doesn't work like that. If I feel like a law needs to get changed, you take your case to Congress, they change the law, and then you go from there. But where agencies go rogue and they try to act like they're more than one branch of government, Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that.
Along those lines, you said just recently that today is the greatest day of deregulation in our nation's history. You're looking at 31 specific areas where you'll cut regulations, you'll take action to cut some of that government bloat. Tell me more.
When I was working through the confirmation process and meeting with senators from across the country, they were talking to me about regulations like the Clean Power Plan 2.0, social cost of carbon, particulate matter 2.5, mercury and air toxic standards, quad OBC, and many others, where they heard feedback from people in their own state that these regulations were disproportionately punishing in a way that was not smart those who they are there in DC to represent and to fight for. They were asking me that if confirmed, as soon as I come into office, that I would heed their concerns that they were expressing on behalf of their constituents, and I would look to take action. Now, at the same time, President Trump, he's done his job for 4 years, and he had 4 years to reflect on it. And he has people with him at the White House who are extremely smart on energy and environmental policy. And they were looking for us to take bold action quickly, and we were happy to do it. The endangerment finding is one of them. Now, I was told by looking into the endangerment finding that I would be going after the holy grail of the climate change religion, as if that was something that was untouchable, that was some new commandment that was etched in stone. And the reality is that a law can be put into place, like the Clean Air Act. The law is the law until maybe it's overturned by a court or Congress takes a new action. But what we've seen too often with laws like the Clean Air Act is that you had the Obama and Biden administration through the years get creative beyond their power.
Let's do a couple of things in a speed round here. Tell me about impacts that some of the changes could have on oil and gas.
First off, we're talking about trillions of dollars of regulatory relief for the American people. We're talking about creating a lot of jobs in different industries. If you want to unleash energy dominance, this is critical. This is necessary. This might be what is most important to be able to achieve those outcomes. If you want to allow an American who right now is choosing between whether to heat their home, get prescription medication, or fill up their groceries, this is the kind of action that allows them to have all three. If there's an American out there who says that they respect their neighbor's choice, ability to go out and get an electric vehicle, but they want a gas-powered vehicle, this is the action that is necessary in order to continue to make sure they have that freedom. It is also hard to operate some of these businesses. Some of these regulations have been put in place for the purpose of putting businesses out and to make jobs disappear. And they want to attack the EPA under President Trump as if there's a binary choice. You can either protect the environment or you can grow the economy. I totally disagree with that concept. I want both. You know, maybe you could say, I want my cake and eat it too. That's exactly what we will demand right now. And we're going to get it.
You talked about ending what you call the Green New Scam, and that Democrats will no longer be able to waste billions of dollars on pet projects. Give me some examples.
Sure, I canceled a $50 million grant to the Climate Justice Alliance. They say that climate justice runs through a free Palestine. Over $2 billion worth of grants. $2 billion worth of grants I've canceled. And that isn't even including the whole conversation over the $20 billion of the IRA funding that was rushed out the door, parked at an outside bank, and those grants I terminated last Tuesday. And the reason why we're taking these actions is because I have zero tolerance for wasting even a penny of tax dollars. And if you come to me with a good idea to save $5,000, $5 million, $5 billion, you have my full undivided attention across the board. And it all adds up. You know, some people will say when you want to save $1 billion, that's only 0.00 something percent of, and you'll use some massive number.
It's $1 billion.
It's $1 billion, or it's $1 million, or it's $100,000. The fact is we shouldn't be wasting a penny.
We're sitting just outside St. Louis right now in a little community that's been impacted for years and years and years by radioactive difficulties. When I hear you talking about ending some of those grants to these extravagant programs or seemingly crazy programs, can the money be better spent in a community like this?
100%. That's my whole criticism of environmental justice summed up in one example. You can make an argument that there's a community that's been left behind, they need help to remediate an environmental issue, and you'll get broad bipartisan support for making that statement. Now here's my problem. In the name of environmental justice, you then get an appropriation to spend billions of dollars to have some left-wing activist groups tell us that there's an issue in the St. Louis area and elsewhere all around the entire country. We don't need to spend money to have activist groups to tell us that there's an environmental issue that needs to get remediated. I say that if you're going to spend $1 that is motivated, legitimized by needing to remediate an environmental issue, then just spend the dollar on remediating the environmental issue.
Every hurricane, every fire, every flood is now blamed on global warming, on climate change, without exception. News reports continually report every single one of them. But we've suffered with these as long as Mother Nature has existed. The most deadly natural disaster in United States history was the Galveston hurricane in the year 1900. If all the money is spent that is asked for by the environmental community to fight for climate justice, to fight global warming, will we no longer have hurricanes and fires and floods?
Of course not. And we also will lose out on an opportunity to actually remediate these environmental issues. I mean, where we are, you have all sorts of residents who have been impacted through many different generations of health costs because of contamination, nuclear waste contamination. That costs a lot of money to fix. And if you spend all of the money on your friends through self-dealing and conflicts of interest, tossing out billions of dollars at a time, there is no resources left to actually deal with delivering clean air, land, and water. Here's the irony with your question, that if you spend billions upon billions of dollars on having activist groups tell us what needs to be addressed, there's no money to actually address those environmental issues.
You mentioned diversity, equity, inclusion programs. Maybe a week or so ago, you said there are like 400 different expenditures that fall under that category.
Yeah, mostly environmental justice with the announcement from last week, but some DEI too.
Have been eliminated. Are there some examples of those that would make people think, my gosh, I can't believe we're actually spending money there?
So I would say, as far as the DEI, it was relatively new, actually, inside of EPA. The office wasn't as big. The environmental justice program at EPA developed a lot over the course of the last few years, several hundred. And what they did was that they brought in different functions that are actually statutory obligations into a new environmental justice office. Now, some of those statutory obligations are really important. So we're going to make sure that while we are ending the environmental justice office, while we are ending the DEI office, that we are continuing to do what Americans demand of us and what congressional statute demands of us as well. As far as the over $2 billion that were canceled of DEI and environmental justice grants, they were largely in the EJ space, in the environmental justice space. And listen, the money is appropriated by Congress. I think it's important to work with the White House, work with the president, work with Congress on having the best use. But this is my message to Congress. I'm not going to waste any money. So they need to go back to the drawing board, because I'm not giving out money to unqualified recipients. I'm not going to be giving out money to, by the way, I'm not looking to take money from a left-wing activist group and give it to a right-wing activist group. And the money that we don't need, we don't want. We don't want. We just want to be responsible stewards of tax dollars. But I would say, as far as the DEI funding, much of that was just internal to the agency, still a relatively new program. The billions have been under this EJ banner, this environmental justice banner, under that argument that there are communities that have been left behind. I agree, there are communities that have been left behind. When President Trump talks about a golden age of American success, it's for all Americans, regardless of race, gender, background, creed. And that is something we're following through. We call it powering the great American comeback. It's about clean air, land, and water for all Americans, unleashing energy dominance, permanent reform and cooperative federalism, making America the AI capital of the world, and bringing back American auto jobs. These are priorities of the American people. They're priorities of President Trump. They're all part of the Trump mandate, and we are not going to rest. We're going to stay up at night, making sure we're fulfilling these obligations, and we do our part to power the great American comeback.
Administrator, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
One of the great concerns of Americans everywhere is whether or not the federal government actually hears them and their concerns. The consistent theme we heard after each of the roundtables and public meetings with Administrator Zeldin this week was people did feel heard. They had hope. We'll see if that hope comes to fruition. But right now, it's good news out of Missouri.